Today is about gun violence, prompted by something that happened to me in the spring. Gun violence could be a topic at any time and also never. Renee's got an announcement to make, and this is a good time to, I'll pass around the mic a little bit, and we can, if you want to just sneak in an announcement, please do.
Good morning. So, I've been in the kitchen thinking ahead to our September getting back to coffee hour. And first of all, I want to thank the folks who have been bringing food during the summer to our social hour, and including Reverend Steve. So thank you. And I have a new sign-up sheet for September. And I know some of you don't cook or bake, and I have created a kitchen pantry. And so there are things that we need that are shelf-stable or stable in the refrigerator. And so you can put them on your shopping list. Buy it, bring it the next Sunday, and we will use it when we have a need. And this is things like boxes of crackers or boxes of cookies, or those 8-ounce wedges of cheese that are sealed. And they have expiration dates, so we'll know to use them when they're still fresh. Sounds easy. So the coffee will, the next time we meet, the coffee will be available. And if you have any other suggestions to make coffee hour run smoothly, please talk to me at coffee hour. Oh, and the other thing is, I have some things, I'm trying to move things along. And if you're interested in a few items, I have extra things that we just can't use and they need to be used up. So if you can, take a look at that. And there's something from my garden along with a recipe that you may never have tried before. And if you're interested, you may take it.
Renee's like a kitchen goddess, isn't she? Any other announcements? Anybody want to sneak in something? Yeah.
Well, we're doing Solar Jazz Fest again on October 28th. Please start to, spread that word. We've got a great lineup. The musicians are already set, so we've got a beautiful representation of some very fun performers. So October 28th, if you please.
Yeah, our fall is going to be busy, so I want to give people a little bit of heads up. We've got a booth at the Pride Fair, right, or some kind of presentation there. We need to detail work on that. We've got a Heritage Day coming up in October, honoring Gordon and the steeple and maybe some town officials, and sort of kicking off the bell. We're going to have an animal blessing. We've got quite a bit of stuff going on, so get ready, you're off vacation soon. There we go. Anyone else while we're here? Welcome to our new folks, and our young people. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Pete, will you light the chalice for us? These words come from Kathy Huff. Very simple. Divine spark from the sacred dark. Today is a symbol of our holy intent. We invite this hour to be illuminated. As I said, the sermon was prompted to life by a shooting of a teen in Chicago in June. It was a rainy day. I got the news from a friend that someone who I had lived in Chicago for a little bit. Didn't know the kid, just down the street. You wouldn't remember that. It might not have even been news to you. It brought me back to notes I took in a doctor's office in Stoneham, Mass. More than a decade ago. It was 2013. I sketched that into a corner of a sheet of paper I borrowed from the office staff. I could have been watching clips from Columbine or Virginia Tech or Orlando. The list is long. I remember thinking in that doctor's office, I brought my mother to an appointment, how long overdue the gun debate was. And I thought, foolishly, because we've realized that it was foolish, but I thought Sandy Hook had to be the last. Just had to, something substantial had to come out of this. Given that I now find myself trying not to be too cynical and resigned to gun violence, and I thought that whole thing just sort of pulled me into taking a moral look at this and asked myself the question, how could we be so committed to guns when this was such a repeating part of our lives? I knew I didn't believe in guns, but I wanted to start with a fresh perspective, and that's what the sermon is today. But as we've come to know, this punishment in my sermons is still a little bit away. And I invite people to stand in spirit or stand in body, either one, and sing. It's going to be number not what we have. It's going to be 1012. 1012 in the teal hymnals, the little yellow ones, or green ones, keeping with Andrew's color choice today, titled When I Am Frightened. I'm going to slip in a story for all ages, essentially kind of a children's moment, just because we've got a couple of kids here. But I'm not going to bring them up forward just because it's embarrassing, I suppose. But there once was this wise woman, and she lived by herself near a small village, and rumor had it she could actually predict when the rains were coming and would kind of know when people were sick and how to calm people down. She had what we might call psychic kind of special powers. People came from all over the land. Some of the children in the village didn't believe it was possible that she was always right in this way, and there was one kind of rebellious young teen boy, and he conspired a way to thwart her powers and challenge her wisdom. So, all through the day, this little young boy scurried to find a bird, a living bird. And he said, I have a great plan. And he and his friends went up to the woman's house, and he had the bird in his hand. And he asked the woman, he said, "Hey lady, come on out here and show us how wise you are." The woman came out. Think of her as like, an herbal witch in the woods somewhere. And the old woman came out and asked, "May I help you?" to this crowd of young people. And the young boy said, "Hey lady." She could hear faint sounds of the bird's wings in his ears. She was very attentive. And he said, "What do I have in my hands? You're so smart." She said, "You have a bird in your hand." And his friend, he was a little embarrassed, and his friends were, wow, how did she know that, right? But he had come up with another plan almost on the spot. He said, "Is the bird alive or dead?" And he realized that he had the power to change the answer to that question, right? So, tell me, old lady, is the bird alive or dead? And she said, "Well, young man, the answer is in your hands." And everyone got still. And he softened, and he opened his hands, and he let the bird go free. And he apologized for having so little faith and for thinking that he would punish this little creature in order to look like a big smarty pants teenager. So, to those young kids out there, don't be a smarty pants teenager. That's our message for the day. In that spirit, let's think about peacemakers at this time that we're pausing for no good reason, no special reason to think about gun violence, which I think has been, at least in my experience in the last little bit of time, quiet. It was written by Eric Cherry, who is the director of the UUA's Office of International Relations, no longer, but that's where he was, and I used to threaten him that I was going to murder him and take his job. I wasn't going to do that. He says this. He says, "The history is complex. The politics are intense. The fear and anger are overwhelming, and the future is always unclear. But glimpses of a hopeful vision will never be bombed into oblivion by anyone. In part," he says, "because we call to mind the peacemakers. People from different faiths, people across time, with different history, set in different political contexts, driven by different emotions, who find room in each other, in their hearts, in their dreams, and in their lives. Today we pause to pray for them. Those who hold firmly to a vision of peace and justice anywhere in the world. Spirit of life, be present. Be present with all who are suffering terribly from the violence that fills so many city streets, poured into our schools, violence that defines the leadership in so many lands. We lift up the hearts of those who fear and inspire courage among those who bring reason and peace. Be present with political leaders. We pray all our hands will be guided by those who are caring for the injured, the hungry, the grieving, and to keep their own hearts and our hearts open to compassion. Remind us of our complexity and responsibility, and lead this body and all those who hear this to be guided towards generous engagement in the world, always holding a vision of peace and where peace meets justice. May we be the water bearers of that message. And may that message enter the hearts of others all around the world. Just be still with that thought for a minute. Now invite people forward to share a joy or concern, things that live in the calendar and the emotional calendar of this moment in your lives. Not a time for announcements, but a time to share what you're going through, good or bad, joy or concern.
And Kathleen, Ed and I had a vacation together that we haven't had in years. Then it was just the two of us, and we went to Prince Edward Island, and we saw Gordon Belcher, met his son-in-law and his wife, and they can't travel and play music with us here anymore because it's up to a year to get that kind of a visa through the State Department. But he says to say hello to you all. So it was nice to be with Ed. That was really a great time. Sophia, as many of you know, is walking the long trail alone, whereas Brian Swanson, my agonizing parent, she lost a shoe on day one and walked for 3 days barefoot, doing considerable damage to her feet. On the second day, she got lost at night trying to find water and slept out overnight. I kept worrying about predators like men, and I'm worried about her executive dysfunction. She got scared straight. She's got a compass, but mother of God. That's really just amazing. And I'm also, my mother, who many of you have seen here at many concerts before, and many events, is getting ready to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Things are skipping right down this road, and so I'm on the daughter's journey.
Hi, I'm Celia. In the last couple days, Richard and I spent time with our dear friends, Maddie and Bruce. Bruce has lung cancer. They got the beast 2 years ago, but it came back a year ago. He's functioning, he's up and about, but I just ask you to send your good and healing vibes to them. It's hard to see them struggling.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Sullivan, and dropping 2 stones today. One is a bit of sorrow for distance of family and recent meetings that were not ideal. And the other is kind of a joy for having refound something that I'd lost. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I dropped 4 stones, one each for my children who are off on adventures. Jasper and Z will be starting back at UMass. We moved Jasper in on Wednesday, so I'm super excited for that. Olivia, fingers crossed, should be hearing maybe today to finalize a contract for her first professional gig, design gig, so think good thoughts for her. And the last stone is for the staff and students and families at the school that I'm working at. We're entering year 5.
People walking into new adventures, young people. People in harm's way of gun violence, people ready to face some memory challenges they may not want to admit, and their families. People who can't travel freely because of changes in politics. We hold those and lift them up. Amen. It's now time for the offertory, and with it, some words. I feel like, draw the circle. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Our offertory words come from a late 18th century non-poet named John Dillinger, who simply says, hand it over, and no one gets hurt. It's now time for our offertory. Sober setup. As I said, Sermon begins in a doctor's office in Stoneham where I was waiting for my mom to finish an appointment with her heart doctor. Breaking news of the Newtown Sandy Hook massacre was on the TV. The staff in the doctor's office paused in their work to, look up at the screen at this emerging catastrophe. This was, still well into the modern time of 24-hour news coverage. My notes said that one sighed, this resigned sigh. I don't remember this, but this is what I wrote down. They had seen this show before was another thing I wrote. They would see it again and again more than I think any of us would have expected. Like many people back in about 2013, at least the way I felt, that I thought it would be the final straw in our national romance with guns. These were kids, after all. Totally helpless kids. It had to be, right? It had to be. Each time it feels like it just has to be the last time, until somewhat recently. Sitting there in the waiting room for the news of my mother's stress test on her heart being performed, both I and our nation were having our own stress test, if you were paying attention. She passed hers. From where we are today, I'd say we failed. We've sadly grown too smart to stop believing there will be a next one. The social scientist in me asked, how many of these, whatever these would be, more than one gun wound, multiple shootings, would it take to do something substantial? The answer is obviously more. My scratchy notes never went anywhere until the shooting in Chicago in June. Sitting in the car in the rain and having little time to the summer kick this sermon into its existence. Being a minister is weird. You try not to chase the latest news story, but to some degree you have to. This was something that's a perpetual news story. So the summer I started to dig into the data. The results are somewhat predictable, but interesting when you look at it. I looked at it with fresh perspective. I've come to learn that although the saga of mass shootings are generally the lead part of a gun story these days, they capture the news. These days, they're only really the point of the arrow, to mix metaphors, not the heart of the problem with guns. I came to also realize that my own limited experience with gun violence and the result of my own relative silence on this matter was a part of the reason these things keep happening. A similar kind of challenging self-awareness can take place when you're looking at systematic racism too, right? All of the sort of big isms fall into this. Don't get me wrong, your eyes and ears have not deceived you. Mass shootings are a single fastest growing part of gun violence in our country. They were one category at one point in time. They've divided into two. The first being mass shootings, where more than 4 people are shot, and the second being active shooter situation, where a person with a gun is firing into a population and has not been apprehended or killed or whatever. I didn't know there was a distinction. Although mass or active shootings have precipitously risen over the last few years, what might be a little bit more shameful to know and a little bit less know is our disinterest in the far less predictable level of gun violence that exists off camera. Researching gun violence, I came to realize head on is that the hard news is that enough people that matter aren't killed enough by guns for us collectively to change our pace. It feels cold-hearted to say that, but not enough people that matter are killed for it to matter. In a way that the drama of a hurricane draws our attention to the far more important long-term dangers of climate change, the drama of these newsworthy events where multiple people are killed on TV from Vegas hotel rooms or whatever might be the only thing keeping this conversation open enough to possibly create some change, sad as that may be. The fact that the average person getting shot is not like us or near us is part of why the final straw might be so long overdue. I have and will say a couple times because I want that sick little feeling to sink into my own heart. I say that because I personally don't know anyone who's lost their life to gun violence. Does anyone who here knows someone that has lost their life to gun violence? Knows the person? We have one. I don't believe that in the last 20 years, and I lived in a dangerous part of Chicago, I heard some gun violence. I have been in the presence of a firearm. I have not in 20 years. If the demographics hold up, likely we haven't either as a general rule. In a way, we're in the safest state in the nation regarding guns. I didn't know if you knew that. Massachusetts is the safest. We're in the safest demographic of people not touched by gun violence here, sort of in a suburb, white, middle-class people. I believe that had we paid more attention and felt the tragedy a little bit more personally, things might have changed. See, had the news of the helicopter and the Sandy Hook thing, I'm going up here to create a little visual height perspective. It's a stupid rubric, but I'm going to try it. Had the news flying over Sandy Hook Elementary School now more than, 12 years ago, climbed a little higher and panned a little wider, some other truth about gun violence might reveal themselves. If we were to arm ourselves with the perspective of the truth, and Newtown became Bridgeport, right? New Haven, expanded out to New York, if you think of a helicopter rising, Boston, the Bronx, we would realize that the broader gun tragedy is taking place not in public schools, but just on a regular basis, not in theaters filled with white folks in Colorado, but instead in our inner cities and rural areas where far less dramatically, mostly one at a time, the statistics show that less than every 30 minutes, we in America lose one more person to gun violence. Here's a pair of sneakers. Every half an hour, someone in America dies at the hands of a gun. Should we have enough patience or concern or to care enough about guns, we would know that Detroit loses more than 500 people a year to gun violence, Detroit alone. That means that in Detroit, one person dies via a gun about every 15 hours. Likewise, Chicago, in particular the South Side, in comparison to a Connecticut town like Newtown, where that tragedy took place, is a virtual shooting range. Similarly, in cities like New Orleans, Cincinnati's a rough spot. I don't have the stats on that. But New Orleans, with only 360,000 residents, kills one of its residents about every other day. Had the helicopter back in 2013 pulled up high enough to view the whole country at night, and we didn't know that the faint little crackle of gun sparks down the sound like small firecrackers, if you're up high enough, and maybe a little bit of a pin light of a gun sparking, it'd be kind of pretty. Truth is, people being shot in America has some of the frequency of a shooting star. In the decade between 2000 and 2010, this was what I found, a total of 335,609 people died at the hands of a gun. That is more than the population of St. Louis, Missouri, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Newark, Orlando, Florida. If you figure the steady increase in the number of Americans, the change per capita is about the same. So certainly, I would never say otherwise, a classroom full of young suburban kids mowed down deserves our tears. Same with Las Vegas, Orlando, you know. But so does the average unnecessary death of a gun taking place quietly, one or two at a time. Let's not lose the tragedy of each life lost, and lots are, far too many. Although the numbers climb proportionally as the U.S. population climbs, gun violence isn't significantly that much better or worse than it was, it seems. An average of more than 10,000 people are shot per year. 100,000 people are shot, not killed. 100,000 people, not killed, but shot. That's the Brady campaign. That breaks down to, on an average day, just under 300 people, 289 people in an average day are shot, not killed. Roughly 1/3 of those shot, 86 to be specific, end up dying. So 1/3 of all gunshot victims die. About 30 of those are murdered of the 36. 53 are suicides out of the 86. And then a small percentage are police violence or something else. Just to hear it again with only slightly different data, the CDC, looking back about a decade, determines that one person is killed by a firearm every 17 minutes, with 86 or 87 people killed during an average day and 609 per week. That means that on average, as long as it takes me to preach this sermon, one person will die from a bullet. For the hour we sit here, 2. Hence the sneakers. That can numb us. Gun violence ruins not just that life, of course, creates trauma all around neighborhoods, families. There's some data on the front of the order of service you can look at and think about. If the view provided by the helicopter we've imagined hanging over Newtown in 2013 were to broaden our perspective even more, you'd realize that the suburban white people in the Northeast, just like us, are in proportion the least likely people to die. Lucky us. Paul Waldman, the author of Being Right Is Not Enough, What Progressives Must Learn from Conservative Success, says so harshly and concisely when asked about real gun control measures. He says, we'll get there. We just haven't lost quite enough of the suburban kids yet. All this might prompt us to ask ourselves just how and why broadly popular, usually this 65% popularity, 75% popularity with gun control measures, efforts to control the spread of guns, why that doesn't happen. The first being that powerful people and people like us who matter the most, like it or not, don't lose enough loved ones to make it matter. The second being the power of the NRA. The third being that guns are truly hard to manage who gets a hold of them. The fourth being the dynamics of the power balance of red states, blue states, congressional control, all of that. Pretty consistently, those on different sides of the gun debate bicker and spout off about what the builders of our government with the Second Amendment designed to accomplish, or exactly what constitutes a well-regulated militia, the words in the Constitution. I've never understood why that allows somebody to own 16 AK-47s. I don't know why it does, but seemingly it does. While we do that, we might also wonder what the Founding Fathers intended in terms of that balance when they elected the Electoral College and created that later on in time. As we experience each presidential election cycle, the small rural red states that predictably control gun measures and resist them have an exaggerated amount of power in the debate. You should know that, just the level of senators that exist. For example, gaining a broader perspective on guns than the tragedy provides, we might see the problem that exists when the 1.5 million people that live in North Dakota and Wyoming receive the same Senate representation regarding guns, for example, among every other thing, that the 60 million Americans who live in the traditionally strict control states of New York and California do. Same amount of Senate support. Having such contradictory beliefs about guns as the NRA does, I felt it appropriate to explore the truth's attitude and positions they take. I was a little shocked to the degree to which I came to see their arguments as having a certain perspective of respect, a certain truth to what they say. I've come to believe that the NRA is right, that the buffet of gun control efforts that recently most get pushed forward are flawed, that they have challenged me that a deeper look at how criminals generally get guns make our detailed focus on waiting periods and mental health screenings can seem almost silly. Knowing that most gun control measures involve screens, waiting lists, constraints at gun shows, I found it not only surprising but a little bit enlightening at how convincing the NRA can be that mostly they just don't really work. Citing statistics that, for example, that 40% of criminals get their guns from friends and family members, and that another 30% of criminals get them from theft or illegal sources, makes monitoring who buys a gun, where, and when somewhat moot. The NRA is also more than happy to tell us that only a tiny percentage of state prison inmates are imprisoned for gun offenses obtained their guns in ways that more restrictive gun laws would have prevented. So they would have, in most cases, gotten a gun anyway. Essentially, the National Rifle Association is correct and needs to be heard when they plead that no amount of background checks on private transfer of sales would have stopped most of the massacres that draw our attention and prompt this sermon. They also make a strong case that sometimes passing new stricter gun laws might make people feel better, but they actually can prevent people who need to defend themselves from defending themselves. I believe the NRA is also correct in its concern that the registration of weapons could be employed in the eventual confiscation of guns, which is the great fear of people who want to hold on to that freedom. History backs up their fear. According to their reporting in the 1970s, New Zealand used a gun registry date to confiscate revolvers. In 1996, Australia confiscated all semi-automatic hunting rifles used in a list of registered firearms from those who legitimately have them. And at present, Canada uses its registration records to confiscate the arms of people after they pass away. Here in the States, they cite that California has already used its required registration lists to confiscate some automatic rifles, and that New York is presently using its lists of citizens with permitted permits to confiscate the guns of people convicted of certain classes of drug offenses. So these lists are, if you want to hold on to your gun, not something you necessarily want to be on, even if they're not being taken now. But I'm not validating the NRA's skepticism. I'm trying to bring out on the table the difficulty of this situation. The NRA appears correct that most statistics will in a way that they will never show the belief that any group of people in any area that may or may not have a gun matters. It feels responsible to say that, as does their point that it's almost always, and we have to remember this too, a well-trained or professional person with a gun that brings an end to an active shooter situation, for obvious reasons. Can you think of many other ways they end? It's a point of a gun fired, or it's a point of a gun restricting somebody's behavior. However, if the NRA is right, and the efforts to control gun violence via background checks and waiting periods don't necessarily work, they fail to take the next obvious step. What would happen if, as most of us do, instead of washing our hands at the loss of the life we seemingly forever have decided that the guns, the freedom to have guns, are worth those lives? What if we return to the question of what would reliably lower our nation's rate of gun violence? Well, actually, the data shows that less guns would. Less guns around does lower the damage done by guns. See, as helpful as the NRA is in clarifying the problem with the solutions to gun violence, they're not so smart or honest about how to actually lower the amount of gun violence in our country. And I believe it is in what so far remains unsayable to them is where the answer lies. Less guns. Less guns. Less guns. The NRA would like us, and those who support gun violence or gun freedoms, would like to think about gun violence as a natural, unfortunate outgrowth of the natural freedom of which our great country was born, right? Frontier mentality, on your own, hunting for yourself. It is, of course, how they see it. They see it as a bit of a way that a weather forecaster sees any given tornado as a natural part of the environment and not a product of climate change springing over the heartland. That understandable givenness that they want to get into our head that this is a natural thing more than any law will solve is their goal. It's graspable, but it's also foolish. The givenness of gun violence in America is really what needs to be challenged. Lift ourselves off out of looking at Newtown and looking then at the nation. Look around the world. And for all the light that the NRA is inclined to help shed on the inadequacies of gun control, you'll see that by comparison, something they don't want to share, Americans are shot and killed by guns in dramatically higher ways than almost any other industrialized nation. See, maybe they're right, and I encourage you to hold this in your mind. Maybe they're right, and it matters very little that only 1% of the guns sold legally at a gun show are sold to a person who will eventually kill someone. Only 1%. What they're less likely to share is that Americans are somewhere between 12 and 20 times more likely to die from a bullet than someone from the most comparable other nations in the world we would see as peers: Canada, Britain, Australia, and Japan. 10 to 20 times more likely an American gets shot. The NRA doesn't care for us to know that, or that on the Wikipedia chart of national statistics assessing gun danger, we are of the 75 countries surveyed to be industrialized, 57 of 75, and we're absolutely the worst in all those large industrial countries. The NRA would likely to think about that this violence is not as much about guns as it is about criminals or badly behaving people who will use other means to do nasty things to one another, like with knives or sticks or bats. But most times someone is shot, it's a gun, or killed, it's a gun. And in every other case, those other tools that people would use to do nefarious things are useful for some other purpose. Mostly guns are used. And what they'd like less likely for us to know is that for every time a gun is fired purposefully in self-defense, there were 4 unintentional shootings, 7 criminal assaults or homicides, and 11 attempted or completed suicides for every time a gun is appropriately, understandably used in a self-defense situation. Guns might make sense if the average American still lived in a rural area and hunt for recreation or survival. Guns might make sense if they were not so frequently stolen or easily sold or passed around in an unnoticed way. Guns might make sense if they were not such a consistently huge part of violent crime, or guns were not so regularly and disproportionately used in destructive ways as opposed to constructive ways. If we were able to undo the senseless death of all the innocent victims of gun violence or the effects of their guns, if we could undo the damage when it was done, you could argue that we could go back and mend fences and put lives back together. If guns were like the heavy, long, 5-foot tool muskets that were around when this church was built, that required 40 seconds to load, if loaded perfectly, when the Second Amendment was written, if any of those things were true, then maybe, just maybe, the rights to own and produce guns would be much more worth defending. But that is not the world that we live in. Channing and the early Unitarians built our religious tradition largely on the back of our capacity for goodness, right? We're kind of an anti-original sin group, pro the possibilities that exist with love and peace, etc. They were right about much, but they were not right about this. We are not, as a species, good enough to have as many guns as we do. Guns today are too available, too clean, too powerful, too easy to get a hold of for our level of maturity and discipline as people. Moreover, I don't believe that we can afford the outdated view that our real personal liberty, that what matters most in our freedoms, lies in an independent armed citizenry. Quite clearly, as we're beginning to feel in the politics of the nation, it does not. Life may have been that way once. It no longer is. And our resistance to this obvious truth is a sign of our nation's emotional immaturity. Spread the news. I'm not bringing you a particular bill to support or protest to attend. I'm asking you to hold in your hearts and your minds that guns in the proportions we have them are no longer acceptable. Amen. Heavy, not a lot of fun, I know. Important to remember. Do we sing or closing words? We have a hymn. 123, Spirit of Life. Spirit of life, unto me in my heart. Ralph Gerhardt says, we extinguish this flame, a mere wisp of matter in process, almost as unsubstantial as the thought of it. I love that. Yet our civilization has harnessed the power of such a flame to drive and shape the new world. So may it be with the power of our thoughts, that in truth and love they may drive and shape a new world as well. Go in peace. Be peace. And happy birthday to Audrey, whose birthday was right around now. Little birthday party in her driveway the other day. All right. Amen.